Hi everyone, I wanted to show you a little Halloween project I did the other day. First of all, what you need is one of those little cloche things, which is like a little dome with a base. Onto the base, take some air drying clay and just fill up the base first of all, obviously making sure to leave enough room for the dome afterwards. This will give you like the surface to work on. If you notice this one I bought, it's got like a little light in the middle, so I'm making sure I don't cover that up because I'm going to use that later on and you'll see why. So first of all, I'm just using the clay and I'm forming sort of a little slight hilly shape, and this is going to be like the ground, this is going to be like the floor. And as you can see, I'm using my tool just to make sure I scrape out any clay that goes where the dome fits in that little recess. Then I'm using the I'm using the pet brush that I use for my dolls, and I'm patting that all over the surface to create a textured sort of grassy ground type of effect. This just adds texture to the surface and just makes it look a bit more like the ground as opposed to smooth clay I've just whacked on there. Then I start building a little house. You'll have to excuse for a minute, it's just out of shot, but I'll realise in a bit and move everything up. But what I'm doing now is I'm taking 4 very small like rectangles of clay and sticking those together to make a little house. And what I'm doing is using my different clay tools just to cut the shapes of the walls out. In a second you'll see I move everything into shot, so you'll be able to see exactly what I'm making. I've moved my camera, so unfortunately sometimes everything ends up out of shot. Here we go, now I've realised. So as you can see, I've made the little wall of the house, and I'm just using different clay tools just to shape it and create the windows and doors and everything. So this will be the front of the house. And as you can see, I've added the sides and the back, and then I'm just making sure it fits over where that little light bulb is, because I want the house to glow in the to light up in the dark. So that's why I'm making sure I don't cover up that bulb. And I'm using a pin to just change the shape of the windows a bit. I also use the pin a bit later on to add texture to the house because I'm working on something that's so tiny. Next I created the roof, and to do that I just used 2 pieces of clay that I've put together in a sort of almost triangle shape. Then I added a small triangle of clay just underneath the 2 roof pieces I made, just to fill up the gap, because obviously it just created like a hole at the top. And it's just a case of very carefully smoothing everything down and blending all the edges together before sticking it onto the house. At first it came out a little bit big, so I had to trim it, and then it's just a case of blending all the edges in, which is what I'm doing while I hold the roof on. Then I decided to create a hole in the roof because I want the house to look old and battered. And then here I'm using my pin to add the texture to the roof. I wanted it to almost have a sort of thatched kind of feel to it, even though I didn't paint it to look like a thatch roof. But I wanted to add that texture, so it kind of looks like a house made out of sticks or wood, and it's a bit like rotten and breaking down. And as you can see there, I was just checking that the light still worked and it lit up the little building. So so I went over sorry, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat today. So yeah, I went over and added a bit more detail, then added a little chimney. And then the next thing to do was to add the little gravestones because I want to make it look like it's a little old witch's hut that's in the middle of a graveyard. So I just created teeny weeny little gravestone shapes out of clay. Then I poked a hole in the base that I'd laid down and then inserted the gravestones. A couple of these popped out when I was painting, but I just glued them back in place with super glue, so it's no problem if they do come out. You could always make them separate and create the little holes for them and then glue them on later on. But I like to do things the hard way, so I was fiddling about with little damp pieces of clay that kept going floppy. And I just added a few here and there. I wanted the gravestones to sort of encircle the house, and I just tried to vary the sizes a little bit, and then just very gently blend the edges in to make sure that they were stuck down as well as possible. Considering there's only two that popped back out, I thought it went pretty well, to be fair. This was the hardest one, was doing the cross at the back. I definitely wanted a cross gravestone, but this modelling clay I'm using is like a paper clay, and it's a bit fragile and it's a bit floppy when it's damp. So it took a bit of fiddling about and a bit of altering, but I did get there in the end. I found I had to support the weight of the whole thing and then press against my finger when I wanted to actually stick the crossbar on. So as you can see, this took me a little while. It was very fiddly, but I got there in the end. Here we go. And in the process I squished one of my gravestones and had to redo it, but it was fine. I just had to pop it back out, give it a little squish back into shape, and then put it back. So as you can see, I've got a little circle of gravestones that are encircling the house, and then I used my pin to add a teeny weeny bit of texture to them for when I paint them and dry brush them later on. For the odd one that needed reinforcing, I just added a little bit more clay. And then where I'd like sort of squish the texture of the surface, I used my pin to just put the texture back. Those tiny little dots that I used created with that brush, I put those back in place with the little pin around each gravestone as well. And then just check the lights were working again, because occasionally I'd like squish something ever so slightly and then you couldn't quite see the light shining as much as I wanted. Then I wanted to add an old sort of spooky tree, so I took some twigs that I've got at the garden that I've had drying for a few days and broke those up and used those to create my tree. I first of all added the two large pieces, and then it was a case of adding little pieces here and there around the model. I wanted it to look like a kind of an old broken down fence and like stumps of broken dead trees. I want this whole thing to look sort of like everything's dead and decaying and a bit creepy and spooky. So that's the idea behind having all the broken fences and things. Then I wanted to add some more branches to my tree, so it was a case of breaking up one of my little twigs and I just super glued that in place. You'll see me do that shortly. Unfortunately, the glue I've got is very runny. It takes a while to set, so I have to fiddle about with it for a bit, but it does eventually take, and then it sticks. I don't know what that flash was then. I think it was to do with the exposure changing on my camera, but it doesn't do that again, so I'm sorry about that. So here you can see I'm sticking on the extra little bit that I want as a branch, like so. I should have got like a gel glue really. Then I had to leave the whole thing overnight to dry in a warm room. It took ages because my room was chilly, so I had to actually leave it overnight, and it was almost dry. And then I had to leave it by my fireplace for a few hours of the morning so it dried off completely. Then it's time to paint. And to paint it, what I did was used some acrylic paint, just straight out the tube for the house. And then for the grounds, I actually mixed the acrylic paint with a little bit of water to create like a sort of wash in places. So first of all, I'm doing the base colour black because I want everything to be like really dark and dull, and really like all the colours to be muted and toned down and stuff. And then as you can see, I paint the ground the same colour as well, and the gravestones and the little fence markers and broken stumps. And that was one of the ones that popped off as I was painting, so I just glued it back into place and left it to set. And I've sped this video up, by the way, because this took me over an hour, and obviously I didn't want to put the video up if it was going to be over an hour long, so I've had to speed it up a bit. If you want to see the whole process, let me know, but like the whole hour's process, but for now I thought I'll shorten it a bit for you. It's a bit quicker as well, because it did take quite a while, because I needed to paint the ground and get the black in all the little recesses, and obviously they were all little tiny pinpricks, so I had to go around in like a sort of dabbing, pokey motion to get all the paint in the little recesses, because obviously later on this will give me the shading that I need for the dark areas, for the little recesses in the ground, and make them stand out a bit more. I found I had to be delicate when painting the little cross, because I had to make sure it didn't collapse and break, because I could feel it wobbling about a bit. I also added a little bit of black to the twigs that I put in as well. I did dry brush them later on so they don't look, completely black. But like I said, this is like the base colour for the whole thing. It just blended everything in and made sure it all looked like it was matching. And then I had to paint I had to glue that back on again. Then I had to paint the base as well, which you'll see me do in a minute. And it's a good idea as well to, when you hold the model in your hand, turn it around and look at it from different angles, and that's when you tend to find little bits you've missed. Now at this stage, what I'm doing is dry brushing a little bit of grey over the top to start showing up some of that detail. And I did a few layers of this. I did like a grey first, and then I did actually put like a very, very pale grey over the top. It was almost white afterwards. So I'm using my grey just to make some of the detail of the ground stand out. Because obviously if it's all like a flat matte black colour, all the detail's going to be lost and it's all going to blend in together. So I'm going round, making the detail of the ground show up. Also adding plenty to make sure the detail of the house stands out. And I did make sure later on that I left like a ring of the black around the house to make it look like everything as it gets closer to the house, everything sort of dies off. Because the idea is this is like a little old evil witch's house. And I added the same dry brushing that I did for the ground to the trees, to the twigs that I added. Then it was time to get out some of my paints and stuff because I did want to add a tiny bit of colour to this. Obviously, having the black as the base coat makes it so everything's very muted, very dull, which is what I wanted. But obviously I did need to add a little splash of colour because I didn't want everything to just be black and grey. You could do, of course, if you wanted to just have the black and grey, that's perfectly fine. But me, myself, I decided to add a little bit of colour. So I added a little bit of green and a little bit of, it's like a bit of green, yellow and brown mixed together. As you can see, it looks quite dull at the moment because this is like the first layer, but I do add a slightly brighter layer over the top to make it stand out a bit more. So I went over the whole thing in my dull grey mixture, dull green mixture. And I just love how it looks all muted and dull and spooky. Then I took a brighter green over some of the areas. Like I said, near the house I made sure it stayed black because I wanted it to look like there was like a pool of like sort of evil taking over the ground or something. But round the edges, as it got nearer the edges, I made it brighter so it looks like the further away that you get from the house, like nature can regain control and grow properly again. Then I added some more white to the house. It was like a mixture of white and a light grey to make all those details stand out a bit more. I added a bit of green by the hole in the roof to make it look like, you know, it's all mossy, and that's because obviously it's all damp and stuff. I added a touch of green to some of the gravestones and the tree to make sure it looked all mossy. And I did, as you can see, a bit of moss to the trees. And yeah, that was pretty much it. And then what I did later on, after painting the base black, is I added some smoke from my instant stick to make it glow in a cool way in the dome. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.